Okay, good afternoon again. We're happy that you came back to the wonderful keynote presentation that we have set up for you. We also want to make sure that you have some time to share with us how this experience, the early panel, the concurrent sessions that went through the whole morning and afternoon. We want to hear from you. Remember that you have the different platforms, social media platform, Twitter, Facebook. You want to continue sharing. And remember that this presentation is currently broadcast live through Facebook and YouTube as well. And we want to make sure that we remind you that you take a couple of seconds to share with us, as we mentioned early in the morning, that next year is going to be our 10th year anniversary of the BronxEdTech Showcase, and we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to let us know how can we make this accomplishment memorable for the next year. What ideas do you have? What do you want to see? And so we want to hear from you. I pasted a link in the chat. Just take a couple of seconds to fill out and share with us. And we are at our main event of the showcase, and we're very, very happy to have with us Jonathan Gagliardi, who is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Effectiveness and Innovation for the City University of New York, who is going to be sharing with us a great conversation, and we want to make sure that you engage. Remember that you could add your questions through the Q&A, and then we will be addressing those questions at the end of the presentation. The topic of the presentation is the innovation imperative, harnessing the invisible and invaluable digital infrastructure in pursuit of equity and academic excellence. A lot of these conversations are going to be connecting with the conversations we had in the morning from our panelists, presidents from the different campuses. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Jonathan. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for both the opportunity to speak with such a distinguished group of thought leaders and implementation experts who are really making large-scale change on behalf of the students, people, communities, and economies that we in the Bronx are so blessed to work on behalf of. And so it's great to be here, virtually in a borough that I know and I love, and exciting to be with each of you to unpack the innovation imperative and what its implications are for how we as a collective educational community are able to best move forward using technology and data to help us in our digital transformation journeys. And so without further ado, I am going to share my screen. And so with that in mind, just a quick validation. Can folks see the presentation? So we are here today to talk about the innovation imperative and thinking about the invisible and valuable infrastructure that we know and love and recognize as a tool that amplifies the human elements of what it is we do as educators and stewards of our community and our institution. And so as we think about that, there are a number of different dimensions that I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to talk about with one another today. First, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we understand the bigger picture. There is a whole series of contextual factors that are ultimately shaping innovation, shaping our need to better leverage data and technology in pursuit of intentional and ongoing organizational transformation. And we're going to talk about why it's important to the Bronx. We're also going to talk about why what happens in the Bronx is important to everybody else. We want to unpack what it actually means to talk about the innovation imperative. We want to highlight the role of technology and data in shaping it, because ultimately those are the backbone of everything that we are ultimately trying to do as we create bigger, bolder, better educational institutions and organizations. We want to talk about emerging trends, unpack promising practices, but also be clear-eyed about what some of the cautionary tales are and what some of the unintended consequences could be if we are not aware of the promise and peril associated with the innovation imperative. And last, certainly not least, we want to connect the innovation imperative to our ongoing strategic planning, both at CUNY, but also for your own respective organizations, and make sure that we point it towards a state of ongoing digital transformation that privileges the idea of academic excellence and equity, given who we are and given the community and the students that we serve. And so let's start off with context. Ultimately, we know that our nation is being shaped by a number of ongoing social, political, and economic trends. They are myriad in nature. From a population perspective, we're seeing unprecedented stagnation. That is something that varies based on region. We in the Northeast and in the Midwest have a tendency to experience the negative side of that, which has included folks who are fleeing from colder Rust Belt regions and cities to warmer, sunnier places. And so as that happens, we're also seeing a relative stagnation more broadly in the United States of declines in geographic mobility. There's also a heightened aging of Americans, particularly when the ages of 45 to 65. Now, as we see this, we also recognize that there is remarkable diversity among our youngest generations. In fact, a plurality of our population at this point, from the millennial generation and younger, are now non-white populations. And in addition to that, we are seeing, the traditional majority of our population, white Americans, have a large aging challenge that is really going to shift the demographic dynamics of our nation in a substantial way. We also have experienced waves of civil and political unrest, and sadly, for a number of different reasons, a sputtering economy that threatens to either amplify or heighten many of the inequalities and inequities that we continue to see in society today. And beyond that, for the very first time, the European organization IDEA actually named the United States as a backsliding democracy. All of those trends and many more have implications for who we are and what we do throughout the educational pipeline. At the same time, U.S. higher education and, frankly, education more broadly are undergoing profound shifts. And so for colleges and universities nationwide and for other educational institutions and organizations, there have been unprecedented challenges, which ultimately have threatened our efforts to improve access, to promote success, to do so in equitable ways, and to improve educational attainment. This, despite the face of ongoing stagnant or diminished funding, both at the state and federal levels, with the exception of the most recent year, given rescue plan funds and one-time dollars, which all of us know we're not going to be able to baseline. And so what are some of those ongoing dynamics? And I do mean ongoing, because while it's fashionable to say that education writ large is in a state of crisis, the reality of it is that many of the headwinds that our institutions face are headwinds that we have been talking about and planning for decades now. And so in addition to having stagnant or diminished funding, we're also seeing what is a false binary, often in state houses, as it relates to how money gets spent and invested from a tax perspective. Particularly as we see populations continue to age, a priority and a focus on healthcare grows. And unfortunately, what often happens is that one of the first lines of discretionary spending in a state budget winds up being higher education. And so as those trade-offs happen, you hear things very often like institutions are being cut to the bone. We don't have enough bandwidth to get things done. There are challenges that persist that we can't solve for, at least if we think about them traditionally. There are concerns over affordability, and there are concerns over quality. Over the better part of the last few years, the reality of it is that the pandemic has heightened our awareness of matters related to inflation, matters related to cost of living, particularly in a place like New York. issues as it relates to folks being able to make and earn a living wage and to do so while they also pursue their studies. And beyond that, trying to ensure that regardless of modality, we're able to offer up a high quality education of value. Demands for optimization and efficiency have begun to creep into the way that we think about our financial model. Often, as many of our students in a strategic planning town hall said to me earlier today, we often wind up thinking about the bottom line in our infrastructure instead of thinking about what we could do to help our students succeed. Those sentiments, coupled with the reality that college going and an educational journey is increasingly difficult given the different types of demands, constraints, and pressures that we had just previously spoken about, mean that we have got to work even harder to create communities of care, to create a sense of belonging, and to make sure that the academic environment that we provide our students is one that they can survive in and thrive in, rather than just having to adapt and evolve to it. And so ultimately, for those broader national level challenges we face, and for some of the more local and social, political, and economic ones, we really have arrived at a point where there is a social and economic imperative to improve educational attainment, to enhance quality, and to do it in ways that don't just privilege the idea of earnings and employment rates after someone graduates, but instead also strengthen democracy, improve civic engagement, create stewards and trustees of our communities, and that do so in a way that creates a sense of affiliation, of gratitude, and of thankfulness for the educational community that has been designed to help people uplift themselves, because it really is one of the greatest tools that we have. These trends we've spoken about, both the pressures we are facing as a society, but also the pressures we are facing specifically in the education sector, help to explain to us why it is we are facing some of the many challenges that we are facing today. Did you know there are roughly 11 million American children who are living in poverty, the majority of which are non-white children? There are barriers to a quality education, especially now for low-income and other vulnerable populations. Educational experiences for minority and low-income and non-traditional students, often remain separate and unequal, creating barriers to college access and success. And for that matter, if we look at some of the history behind policy and resource allocation for our nation's minority-serving institutions, they have been under-resourced and underfunded in comparison to other kinds of institutions. We also know that some folks see the American higher education as something that remains deeply segregated by socioeconomic status and by race and ethnicity, and that gaps in postgraduate outcomes for historically marginalized populations have in some cases widened. Bear in mind that as we begin to think about that, and as we begin to think about those larger demographic shifts, those things converge in very provocative ways. And so as we think about broader social inequities, we're talking about housing, we're talking about food insecurity, we're talking about rental security. And in fact, the recent news that Board of Renting is going to increase, average leases by, I believe, 2 to 4% just coming today, really ultimately underscores the fact that during a time of unprecedented inflation, during a time of stagnant earnings, during a time when folks are able to stretch their dollars and cents out less and less, giving them the tools they need to transform their minds and to change their lives is going to be increasingly important. And that is something that is difficult to do. But we're here to do that. And just because there are pervasive structural issues that prevent people, communities, and economies from reaching their full potential, the reality is we can't stand on the sideline and let that happen, because the more they persist, the more divided we become, and that does not have to happen. We know that the arrival and the continuation of COVID-19 has in some eyes served as an accelerant of our nation and our community's growing challenges. People have had to make difficult choices between working or going to school or not doing either in an effort to try to protect their health, well-being, and safety of themselves, but also their loved ones. They've created difficult times, and all of us have faced hardship over the better part of the last 2 to 3 years that would have been seemingly unthinkable even 5 years ago. And what I do want to do is just take take note of that, honor that, and tell all of you as educational leaders who are thinking about leveraging technology and data in compelling ways, that what you have done over the better part of the last few years is nothing beyond remarkable. And you have literally taken a sector and helped to transform it in ways that no one would have thought imaginable within a matter of 24 or 25 months. And so that is just something that I hope you all feel proud about. It is something I hope you all have a great sense of ownership over, because many of whom I've known ever since I began at CUNY, working whether it was with the Committee of Academic Technology or at Lehman College in the Bronx, are really ultimately the pivot point where all of this has happened. And it's happened in ways that have opened our eyes to the benefits of creating more personalized and flexible approaches to delivering an education that people can succeed with. So we've spoken about the national context, and we've spoken about some of the broader social and political issues that exist. Let's talk a little bit about the Bronx and why here, why now? And what I would tell you is where else? The Bronx is an amazingly vibrant community of people who care about one another. Its distinctiveness and its potential are unparalleled in any other place in this country. And so let's unpack why that is. The population density of the Bronx is 376 times that of the entire US. And we have a borough whose population is larger than 11 states and the District of Columbia. And when you think about the future of New York State, a state that has experienced population loss, outward migration, and the rapid aging of a population, fact remains, the future of the Bronx is the future of New York State. Even though it's a little sliver of land, beautiful land, of course, that's only 0.09% of the total land area of New York State. 9% of the state's population is within the borders of the Bronx. The disproportionate impact we have as leaders of education in this borough stand to shape the future of our state and beyond. So what we do here to promote equity, upward mobility, academic quality, access, success, using technology, using data, is ultimately going to serve as a national model for how increasingly dynamic communities with more diverse people, with divergent needs, but with a shared interest in changing their lives with a high quality education, is going to matter to other folks. And so what we do matters everywhere. And if we do it well, we will not have only improved our borough and the people, communities, and economies we serve, but we will have improved our state. We will have improved our nation. And so keep that in mind late at night when you've worked yourselves to the nubs. It matters what you do. And what you've already done is the foundation that's going to allow us to continue along our innovation journeys to focus on digital transformation. Why is it important? Well, because ultimately the cohesion of our society depends on shared confidence and trust in our systems, our institutions, and one another. Higher education, in education more broadly, succeeds based on its ability to work and collaborate in tandem with government, the private sector, and civic society. When we do that well, when we're at our best, we create a shared sense of identity and purpose, and that will allow us to ensure that equality is at the bedrock of everything that we try to do. It's absolutely vital for a functional and a prosperous society. The reality of it is that we're at a point of reflection. Our structures, our systems have enabled us to become the most powerful nation in the history of the world with the most vibrant culture and some of the greatest resources. And yet at the same time, we know that all things are not equal for all people. And those structural shortcomings make it difficult, if not impossible, for us to realize our value proposition as a nation and as a community of folks who care about one another. And that value proposition includes equality, It includes freedom, it includes opportunity, and it includes transparency. The best way to get there is through the delivery of a high-quality education, because it fosters social cohesion, it promotes economic growth, it creates a shared identity. And in doing that, that allows us to design more effective, resilient, personalized educational ecosystems. And those ultimately strengthen our communities, they strengthen our society, and they tighten our connections to one another. So beyond even helping our students to leverage our institutions as a tool to help move their lives forward, the residual impacts of what we do transcend individual people. And I invite all of you to reflect on that as we begin to think about who it is we are, what it is we really do, and what it is we really mean when we talk about making big changes as it relates to the use of data and technology in pursuit of a better educational ecosystem for all. And so we're at this inflection point. We've had a lot of sustained hardship. And at the same time, we've done a lot of really wonderful things together. You've done it with compassion and determination primarily, but you've also leveraged technology and data as tools to amplify that passion and determination. So as we think about how we harness the invisible and invaluable infrastructure of technology and data, it's worth pausing and asking ourselves a question. Do we really want to revert back to the fall of 2020? Or do we want to dig deep, take a collective breath, think about the things that have worked incredibly well, and organize the many decades worth of innovation that you have all helped to lead that has taken place within a fraction of that time? You take that all together, and while there have been a lot of challenges in the recent past, there are so many opportunities for us to continue to move forward. I want to take a minute and hear from all of you right now. And so if you'd be willing, go to menti.com and use the code 35021921. It's 35021921 at menti.com. And answer the question, over the last few years, what innovation or achievement are you most proud of? And how did you use technology and data to do it? Again, go to menti.com, use the code 3502, and type in 1921. The question, over the last few years, what innovation or achievement are you most proud of? And how did you use technology and data to do it? We'll give it a couple of minutes. Again, that's menti.com, and the code is 35021921. So as the Blackboard administrator at Lehman, I am most pleased with the fact I was able to get faculty who never used technology to use it and to teach and to be proficient at it. Cheers to that. A few years ago, when the entire university needed to flip its 1,400 academic programs completely online, the reality of it is in addition to that, many of you, whether you're Blackboard directors, you're running the LMS, your Centers for Educational Teaching and Learning, you really all ultimately not only flipped the programs, but you implemented a whole series of dozens of training and professional development opportunities for faculty, not just to click a Zoom button while they're in the LMS, but to use innovative forms of pedagogy, So thank you for sharing that. We're seeing increased use of collaborative technology such as Teams and Zoom. I think many of us have wound up beginning to implement good principles and practices of pedagogy into our meetings, let alone our classrooms. That's been really exciting to see. This idea of collaboration is something that seems to be flowing through many of the comments that you all are talking about. New performance-based admissions process for returning students with poor GPA that lets them demonstrate skills and knowledge via an electronic portfolio. But wow, in light of the fact that many of our colleges and many of our institutions have temporarily suspended the use of standardized test scores for undergraduate admissions, the fact of the matter is folks have gotten really creative in how they're able to help students show that they've got what it takes to succeed. And that's really exciting to see. So I tip your hat, whoever you are. I brought a rock-solid super fiber optic network to the entire university that we all use and was there ahead of the COVID crisis. Whoever you are, the fact you looked around the corner and you were able to get us there, thank you for that. I'm sure that many of the efforts folks are describing here really ultimately were built on that fiber optic network. Doing more with less. Whoever said that, as we were talking about before, the fact of the matter is education, more broadly speaking, is doing more with less. And the way that you're able to do that is through innovative approaches to using technology and data. And whoever you are, that person who taught a full load of classes by whatever means and couldn't have done it without an LMS, good quality internet and staff on campus to give students devices and support because the digital divide is real, you're totally right. And the fact you're able to teach a full load under so many debilitating conditions is a pretty miraculous feat. So thank you for continuing to teach our students and to put their needs first. For the use of blog and discussion, look at all this. You all have done amazing work with technology and data. Beyond the work that you did with your hearts and your minds, you really all just have a great deal to be a part of. And, I think that it's really opened up opportunities for all of us to be able to move forward. And someone here who must know me or my background a little bit because you are talking about middle states and accreditation. Many folks have been able to use many of the SharePoint tools and software to great effect to better organize information and to increase the probability of being able to pass with flying colors accreditation. Switching all library services online, that's so hard to do, and very proud of you for being able to do that too. And as Ken Schlesinger, one of the best librarians in the Bronx, would say, the library is the heart and the mind of a college. Let's talk about the innovation imperative. I think we kind of mapped out what a lot of the innovation imperative is. We know that there's been a massive technological revolution that's taken place over the better part of the last 5 decades. We're going to home in on that a little bit, though I know that the advent of computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning has dates that stretch back even into the early 1900s and before. And so, more recently is what I will say. Some of those key events include in the 70s, the development of the first mobile phone, though if you remember, it was a huge brick that IBM had that apparently took 10 hours to charge for every 30-minute phone call that you were going to have. As we went into the 80s, the birth of personal computing, the advent of the World Wide Web, our first laptops, which was preceded in 75 and 76 by Microsoft and Apple being founded. We saw that those big brick of smartphones began to get smaller and smaller, especially in the 1990s. We saw Bluetooth technology get introduced. The first social network, which I didn't even know about until the last few days, which was 6 Degrees. I assume that may have something to do with Kevin Bacon, whose brother, of course, is a graduate of Lehman College. See, it all comes back to the Bronx. Began to proliferate. In the 2000s, we saw broadband internet, Facebook, the iPhone, 3D printing, and a number of other key technological advancements continue. And more recently, over the last 10 years, the proliferation and adoption of digital currencies and digital payment methods, the idea of driverless cars, virtual reality, things that I've seen many of you actually introduce into your own work. As this happens, possibilities to do more with less and to augment our natural and built environments with cutting-edge technology that strengthen the learning experience, regardless of the modality we're using, those are all becoming possibilities more and more. One of its offshoots is an ongoing analytics revolution. And so, did you know 64.2% of the global population as of last year is now estimated to be using the internet? And that each day humans are creating 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. The amount of data that existed by 2020 was 44 zettabytes. It's 40 times the number of stars in the observable universe. And 75 billion IoT, Internet of Things devices, are expected to exist by 2025. We know that the market for big data and big business continues to accelerate and expand. And it's anticipated that by the end of the year, it'll reach $275 billion, which is a double-digit annual growth rate since 2019. So when you think about the digital revolution, when you think about its two primary branches, technology and data, the more exponential it becomes, the more broadly adopted it will be, the more it's going to become a part of our day-to-day lives, which it already has. And so that's another thing we ought to take note of. The digital, technological, and analytics revolutions have reached a state of maturity and ubiquity that I think at some point in time, we've begun to take for granted. Whether it's Netflix recommending whether or not you're going to watch the latest and greatest show or catch up on some reruns of Friends or Seinfeld, if that's what you prefer to do, not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. The reality of it is that, whether it's grocery shopping, instant delivery, dating for that matter, or thinking about the global positioning system or the fitness data that we glean from our smartwatches, which gets fed into our phone and that often gets put into apps that we use to lead better and healthier lives. We use the technological and analytics revolution on an almost daily basis personally. We're also using it professionally. We have begun to see the blending of the physical educational environment, the traditional means of teaching and advising, with the very additive means of predictive analytics and machine learning, if properly harnessed, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. We're leveraging technology so that students can access high-quality education programs from afar. And in fact, our faculty, our staff, and our students were able to do that from many, many points across the globe during the peak of the pandemic. And so whether we're talking about something that we're doing personally or whether we're talking about something that we're doing professionally, we're using technology and data in really provocative and compelling ways. We're seeing that continue to evolve and specifically converge. As the digital revolution creates these convergent digital and analytics infrastructures, they both grow in importance and they both amplify the value of one another. This idea of combinatorial digital innovation, which is ultimately the practice of using different components of the digital revolution and analytics revolution together, really ultimately create and amplify the value of organizations when they are converged together. It's helping us to create more frictionless pathways, whether it's across CUNY or throughout our entire educational ecosystem. It's creating better customer service, whether we're talking about folks not having to wait in line at the bursar's office anymore because of queuing software, or not needing to worry about whether or not they have to commute from an hour north in Westchester or an hour south, somewhere in Queens or Long Island for that matter, to come to the Bronx to get the positive experience at their educational institution. It's also allowing us to better organize and optimize our information. That's allowing us a clearer sense as to where our opportunities and challenges are as educational organizations. It's giving us a chance to be more reflective and to think about what our student needs are and to privilege our students first and our customer needs first. It's also allowing us better ability to tell stories using evidence and data and technology that are drawing the interest of folks from across the world. There's a reason why Mackenzie Scott gave Lehman College $30 million. And it's because so many of you, whether you're working in some of the top feeder schools or whether, you're Ron Bergman, the, wizard CIO who's been able to help implement and advance a number of different, efforts and initiatives, or, you're working in institutional research or you're working in advancement to do better storytelling using data. And the fact of the matter is, those tools that allow you to do more with less help to create step change gains in graduation and retention rates and in retention and progression. And that's through tighter partnerships throughout the higher cradle to career pipeline. And as you do that, people are taking notice. So as we're developing an ecosystem that centers on students, not structures, it's going to make us better at what we do. And you all have a lead role to play in helping that to happen. Now, there are key trends that continue to emerge across sectors. I want to take a moment here and talk a little bit about what Gartner has identified as the top strategic technology trends for 2022. We know that data and technology are going to form the backbone of future trends in the use of digital technologies. It's going to lead to patterns in artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning analytics, for example. It's going to create more dynamic educational experiences that are going to be more personalized to the students or student segments who are trying to engage in their educational journeys in specific ways. That's going to include some things that we all know and love, like thinking about everything from generative artificial intelligence to more dynamic and resilient organizations that are built off of cloud-based platforms, distributed enterprise, and that really are focused on creating a total experience based on combinatorial efforts, initiatives, and assets that we have. It's also going to lead to things like deeper conversations around data governance, privacy, and security. Because for all the potential that these programs have, if used improperly, actually have a great deal of peril, both for our organizations, our communities, and those who we serve. And so whether you're, Robert Berlinger helping to, create new types of secure means of accessing the technological tools that our CIOs are implementing, whether it's Authenticator or whether it's new access to Microsoft 365 at the City University of New York, or as a faculty member, you're thinking about ways to preserve academic quality and integrity while at the same time, honoring the privacy of our students. There are also many things to think about. Thinking about hyper-automation, thinking about automated systems, thinking about how we as a university or we as a community of educational affiliates across the pipeline are able to work together, blend infrastructure, share data, and give students real-time information that they can use to steer their educational journeys and careers. Those are the ways that we're going. If we're able to harness this information, this technology, and this data properly, ethically, and responsibly. Those trends are taking form in education in more discrete, specific ways. From a social perspective, that includes more hybrid and online learning forms. Many of you I had the great pleasure of working on in terms of implementing HighFlex across the City University of New York, an effort that led to the creation of offering multiple modalities to students, allowing them the choice to engage in their education as they saw fit, when they saw fit, how they saw fit. And so whether you were the folks at the CUNY SBS who really helped to spearhead that initiative along with Elena Jadko, another Bronx site who's working at Lehman, or you're somebody who ultimately is helping students figure out what the best modality is for them. It's critical. Trying to translate the transcript in the classroom into discrete skill acquisition through synchronous and asynchronous means, both credit and not for credit, in high school, in college, and beyond, are things that people are also leveraging technology and data to do more and to do more effectively. Remote work, blending the workspace, something that we're all continuing to grapple with and have a better understanding of what the right balance is. I think what we could all agree with is some of the tools many of you have spoken about have actually created an enhanced work experience, whether you're in person or face-to-face. Learning analytics and big data, we know there's an analytics revolution. We'll talk about that in a short while. But also thinking a little bit about how political instability, for example, is driving uncertainty, or ideology might impact pedagogy, or how decreases in public funding may make it a necessity for us to think differently about what it is we do. From an economic perspective, thinking about the cost and value of a college degree, reflecting on our own value propositions, thinking about how we are able to leverage data and technology to offer up a plurality of models to students based on their interests, their needs, and their wants, will go a long way in determining whether or not folks are going to continue to want to come to the Bronx to get that high quality education of value or look elsewhere. Knowing so many of you, my bet's on the fact that more people are going to want to come to the Bronx. So we think about financial deficits, we think about shortfalls in revenues, we think about holes in our long-term financial model. We're also going to want to think about how we can leverage the innovation imperative to create new revenue streams, to extend our reach without necessarily being confined to the constraints of our physical infrastructure, while also recognizing that that physical infrastructure has so much value, particularly if we make it sustainable, particularly if it is used in a way that invites students in, creates communities of care, and that our campuses and our schools continue to serve as really the constellations that form our community. And so again, education is being reshaped in profound ways. Data is a big component of that. And as we begin to think about big data in the analytics revolution, the fact of the matter is that there's a growing sea of demands for data. Not just data, I should say, but data that gets turned into insights that translate into actions that you can take to transform your institutions. So as we think about that, we know a couple of things are true. Technology is helping us create more data. You want it as fast as you can get it. And you want as much of it as you can get that will help you create insights to help you drive organizational and educational effectiveness on a daily basis. Because after all, what you do on a daily basis matters to the students you serve and the communities that we are lucky enough to be trustees of. We also know that data's got to have value to it. And so what and how can it be used to help in our pursuit of digital and organizational transformation is also key. Variety. Now look, educational institutions, colleges, high schools, and beyond are traditionally siloed organizations that are slow to move. That often means that there are silos. Those loosely coupled organizations often see those silos replicated in our technology and data infrastructure. Yet whether or not we're able to come to the table and integrate and confederate that well, it's going to go a long way in determining whether or not the data we have tells us the things we need to know to move an organization forward. And that's really key. But of course, you got to trust it. And so, this isn't just about technology. It's about a culture of technology. It's about a culture of evidence. It's about a culture of adoption. It's about a culture of governance and conversation. And so while data governance may not be the sexiest construct alive, the reality of it is it's a fluid paradigm that allows us to get around the table and talk about what we want our technology and what we want our classrooms to do, and how it is we want to be able to leverage data and technology to help us get to that place. And if we don't trust it, as the old adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. As that occurs, technology and data have opened up the floodgates to new kinds of analytics opportunities for us. Whereas previously, we were constrained to looking at the recent past and reflecting on what happened. Very quickly, we have turned a corner and are now at the point where we're beginning to implement both predictive and actionable analytics opportunities for us that are only made possible based on the fact that we are implementing single sign-on tools, that we are working together to create one-stop portals for our students, that we are driving access and driving engagement and interaction with our college assets, both digitally, whether you're in person or whether you're doing it from online. And so this shift, this kind of digitization of both our physical and our virtual assets, has really opened the doors to us being able to understand and use data in compelling and powerful ways. So as we begin to not only look at what happened, but look at what might happen and what we may want to offer up to our students in service of their academic journeys, we're going to want to be around the table, as we were talking about before, with all of those V's. To do that, we need data that are timely. We need data that are accurate. We need data that are relevant. We need data that are integrated. And the only way that we're able to do that is by acknowledging the reality that technology and data are equal parts art and science. It's very easy to focus on the technical elements of being able to use technology and data. It's a little bit harder to get people around the table and have an ongoing conversation, as messy as that might be, because it requires upfront work, trust, community building, consensus building, and a positive culture that views these tools as things that are additive to the experience of our students, rather than a sea change from what we've done or something punitive that's being used solely for the purposes of accountability. And so remember, how our technology and our platforms are engaged in and how our data are used reflect the stories and the lived experiences of our students, our faculty, and our staff. So how is that actually going into sector-specific trends? Well, we're using technology and data to define evidence-based aspirations and to deliver on them. The one that comes to mind, because it's a place that's close to my heart, is the 90 by 30 challenge at Lehman College. We're beginning to think more about personalized student experiences and pathways. The creation of the transfer exchange tool, which has now been scaled across the City University of New York, thanks in large part to the leadership of Renee Sarmiento, Chris Bonacore, Ron Banks, Richard Finger, Lisa Malam, Gina Mucci, are all things that people have been able to move forward as effectively as possible because they came around the table and they developed data tools that allow people to move their educational journeys forward as effectively as possible. Understanding challenges related to equitable access and outcomes, also key. Modeling out what we do in order to make sure that our education remains one that promotes equitable access and outcomes is the key to the future of the Bronx, the state, and the country. Thinking of academic quality and integrity are also key. And developing budget optimization frameworks, because we don't know where the money's coming from as we look ahead into the future, are also vitally important. And improving our physical and digital infrastructure is also going to be key too. That is going to help us as we go along our digital transformation journeys. And so as we begin to think about what it is we need to do to organize and implement a digital transformation strategy at our own institutions, at our own educational organizations, throughout our educational pipeline, we have to think about it through the lens of strengthening academic quality, promoting learning and promoting equity, doing it by strengthening high quality research and giving our scholars and creative faculty access to tools that will enable them to create more and to generate greater value from their creativity, and to optimize our human resources and to build out our organizational dexterity. We have to become more nimble in a more volatile environment. And the fact of the matter is that it's going to be a difficult thing to generate momentum and inertia on, but it's one that we can only do if we use technology and data to be able to move forward. And so ultimately, I ask all of you, how can you use technology to be able to transform your organization? In transformative ways, of course, but in ways that are both incremental and that are rapid, because it's a blend of rapid and incremental transformation that we really need to aspire to. We're doing that at the City University of New York. And as we're thinking about our digital transformation journey, we're seeing that as an opportunity to develop a strategic roadmap that is aligned with that. We are doing that by focusing in 6 key areas. We're thinking about the academic core, going back to how we actually realize academic quality and integrity, how we strengthen the student experience, how we improve and make more current our academic programs, transcendent of modality. As we think about upward mobility and prosperity, how do we codify and understand what it is that makes us one of the nation's top engines of equity and upward mobility? The good work of folks like Basilia Toussaint, for example, allow us to do that, using data to better unpack what it is we do, as faculty, as students, as staff, as teachers, as advisors, as scholars, is vitally important. If we do that in 20 or 30 years, we will not ask ourselves the question, well, why is it that we're no longer a top engine of upward mobility? Thinking about a research and innovation ecosystem, what is it we can do to work across our colleges, our schools, our high schools, our feeders to give students the opportunities to create? We do, after all, live in a knowledge-focused economy where you have to create and connect and think critically. To do that well requires exposure to experiential learning. It involves being more focused on high-impact practices like undergraduate research, work experience. We can do that better using technology and data. Beyond that, thinking of a student-centered, equity-driven university. Sadly, in many cases, higher education has begun to be known as something that is focused on structures, not students. In our financial model, certainly, how we use technology and data to develop a plurality of models that both meet students where they are, but also provide us with the opportunities to be able to move forward, not just in ways where we survive, but in ways that we thrive as a university and an educational ecosystem. And to do that, of course, as we were just talking about with digital transformation, what is it we could do to become a more synergized university? And so how do we promote the distinctiveness of each of our colleges and educational affiliates while at the same time promote integration opportunities based on shared interests, challenges, and opportunities? All that's happening at CUNY. And as partners, we invite all of you to engage in that through our road mapping process. It is important to note as we wrap up that data and technology are not a panacea. They can be used, they can be misused, without great care and constant attention. Whether we're talking about the introduction of biometrics to promote the access to educational resources, whether that would be a library or whether it be a student hall, or whether it be access to a phone or a laptop that's been loaned out. Whether we're talking about using predictive and prescriptive analytics in ways that are intended to nudge students forward on their educational journeys. Whether we are thinking about how we define data, what it is that we do when we use technology, how it is that we analyze it, what we bring to the table when we do that. Those are really key in determining whether or not digital transformation is done in service to our students and communities, or in ways that butt up against our shared values and shared desire to promote equity, to promote upward mobility, and to end some of the bad structural inequities and systemic racism that exist in society today. And so as we begin to use those tools, it's just a word of caution. I ask all of you, as leaders and as stewards of the use of technology and data in our field, proceed with caution, bring people to the table, make people aware of the promise, but also the peril of being able to use technology and data in ethical, responsible ways. Because while we have this huge opportunity in front of us to be one of the top engines of equity and upward mobility, if we just leave it to the technology and data, unfortunately, whether that's in bias that's baked in data and technology, whether that's bias that's baked into the way that we actually interpret and analyze it, or bias that's baked into the structures and systems that aren't just education, but frankly are more broadly across society, those will win out unless we are taking a cautious, intentional, and ongoing approach to looking under the hood, recalibrating, and bringing people to the table and ensuring that their perspectives and their experiences are being reflected in the tools and the data we use to try to strengthen their educational experience. So I want to open it up to all of you again. We just spoke about a lot of trends. What trends in technology, data, and digital transformation excite you the most, and why? Take a couple of minutes, go to menti.com. The code is 3502-1921. Again, 3502-1921. What are the trends in technology, data, and digital transformation that you are most excited about? Again, menti.com. The code is 3502-1921. The code is 3502-1921. What trends in technology, data, and digital transformation excite you the most, and why? We'll give that just another minute. Ooh, we're seeing a lot of fun ones come up. Artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality. Totally. I did see our chancellor with some Oculus goggles on a couple of weeks ago at the School of Professional Studies. It made me pretty jealous because I've never actually looked at any of those. How we can use those for everything from simulations to teaching academies, are incredibly, just the possibilities are endless. A blended campus, totally. Technology and data are never going to replace the in-person experience that people have. They will augment it, though, and they'll provide folks with a state of ongoing access to it that they simply don't have now, as we learned throughout the pandemic. The idea of personalized, adaptive learning is something that, if we're able to achieve, is going to allow us to meet students where they are and create a student-centered university rather than students who have to conform to our own, whether that's a university or high schools or colleges. Public interest technology should drive our digital transformation. Whoever said that, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that remark. the ability to access and process larger quantities of data and information. You're totally right. In many ways, there are two kinds of analyses we could do. There's the artisanal one where you spend months at a time curating your methodology and your data sources and really targeting in on it. And as my economist friends, I'm sure some of them who are on the line would say, taking a Bayesian approach to throwing it all up against the wall and seeing where causality might emerge can help us identify patterns and trends that we can then more deeply explore. Wasn't possible before. The use of AI, given the complexity of your variables involved in student success, AI can assist. That's the operative term on that. And somebody jumped the gun here, and I'm happy you did that. I'm more concerned rather than excited, particularly around the area for privacy for personal data. The idea that the Supreme Court would strike down privacy rights affects me more than healthcare. It also adds fuel to the monetization of personal data. And I think to your point on that, it's one of the reasons why Gartner has outlined the reality that software and tools that allow for the privatization of data are going to be important. The redefinition of instructional modalities, and many of you who are a part of the CUNY community know that the introduction of HighFlex was met with great optimism, but also concern, and questions remain for a long time over whether it would be a modality or a course attribute. And those are really difficult conversations to have. And I think it's important that people have those conversations. What's exciting about it is that it seems like it's being codified, which is something that you all ought to be really proud of. Transferring a master's program focusing on teaching adults from an in-person class program to online. You're totally right about that. Teaching in person versus teaching online, there are some commonalities, but there are some very stark differences. And that isn't a good or a bad thing. It just is. But knowing how technology can enhance both, how data can enhance both, can do everything from strengthen the student experience to allow us to assess better and to improve our craft in a more continuous way. Wearable technologies. All these are great. Organizational tools that allow faculty, students, and staff to better keep on top of their information interconnections and hopefully Zelocast and applications. I don't know that I know that word. Maybe it's a typo, but we'll find that one out later. That allows students to reach their full potential. This is all really rich stuff. I really appreciate it. So to my friend in the green box who jumped the gun a little bit, we are going to go to the next one. What are you most concerned about and why? Before we go to things you could do in your campus and some parting thoughts. So again, menti.com, use the code 3502-1921. 3502-1921. We just spoke about what you were most excited about. Well, most of us. And we're here to talk now about what concerns you the most. And I think, the note about privacy and security concerns is very real. And, I think that coupled with the potential, misuse of technology and data, particularly given that we know that those are the two backbones of our digital transformation journeys. It's going to be really key to spend a lot of time on. As organizations, many of which, really are the first steps of their journeys. So again, what trends in technology, data, and digital transformation concern you the most and why? Short-sighted vision on our leadership. That's a great point. The use of data and technology for organizational transformations is not a short game, particularly in education, and especially in public education, whether it's higher education or K through 12. The reality of it is that shared governance is in our DNA, and it's something that if harnessed properly, actually creates really strong foundations that, again, may take a little bit more time, but that over the long haul, it's worth its weight in gold. And that continuous engagement really does hold the key to whether or not technology and data get adopted well, with fidelity, and are seen as a positive and constructive component of our academic communities. Privacy and data mining. Privacy around big data are lagging behind technological advances. Many of the folks making policy or laws have little or no understanding of the implications. That mirrors their lack of knowledge about DNA and science. Great points. All the more reason for a bigger tent approach around it to make sure that different expertises, perspectives, and experiences are reflected and how we go about implementing big data projects and analytics tools, and how we use that to inform the creation of new kinds of software and technologies. And we're already missing support for basics, both in staffing and basic instructional technologies. To your point on that, a lot of folks talk about big data and analytics. But many of you have heard me say, if I could get a college or a school to use descriptive statistics in their daily basis and understand the actionable end they have, that really would move the needle for most public colleges and universities across the country, let alone in the Bronx. Younger generation are less concerned about privacy than access. And it's interesting, though, when you take a look at that matter, what's fascinating to me is that it isn't as though students or young people don't have concern about privacy, but they're willing to exchange it in exchange for value. Whether or not that value is something that they clearly understand, and whether they know what they're exchanging for that value is something that they clearly understand, are two completely different things. And it's really incumbent upon us to make sure they're a part of the conversation rather than reacting to it. Unequal ability to use data or technology across the community. Totally. I think, creating more programs around data and scaling out the use of evidence and technology are going to be key. The digital divide, both for faculty, staff, and students, unequal access to technology, that's very real too. Hours are being cut, the libraries are being closed, which is sad. Unbalanced or lack of investment in human talent to support the increased use of technology in learning. All great points. This is such rich information. I would add one too, which is I'm really concerned about the reality that we very rarely talk about what this is, which is rich qualitative data. Quantitative data tells us the what. The qualitative data is what tells us the why. And so I do hope that people return to conversation, return to looking at words, taking the long form, and giving people the opportunity to offer up their perspectives in a more clear and qualitative way, and taking that seriously and absorbing it. It's too easy to only mix with like-minded people online. You're right. Bubbles are real. That contributes to some of the divisiveness that we see in our nation and some of our communities today. And so, thank you for that. And, data loss and recovery. A lot of great stuff here. So to conclude, we are all at the precipice of transforming the educational sector in ways that could be incredibly helpful and productive to our students and to the people, communities, and economies we serve. We have the privilege as technology enthusiasts, as data enthusiasts, as thought leaders, people who like to look around the corner and be early adopters of shaping that. We want to do it in ways that strengthen value, that do not promote inequity. We want to do it in ways that create a comforting and a constructive and a useful academic environment, not one that creates bubbles and that actually is a deterrent from real learning. We want to create an objective understanding of the promising and perilous nature of technology and data, not because we don't want to use it, but because we want to use it well and in service of our mission, our vision, our values, and our students. And we want to make sure your leadership, the will, the urgency, and creativity can help us serve the Bronx better. Because like we said before, Bronx has so much potential, not only to transform the community, but through education to transform our state and our nation. We have the opportunity and privilege to do that. And I'm confident that we are going to do that together moving forward as a broader educational ecosystem. I know thank you was there. I'm sorry, I probably juked you out right there. What can you do? If you're here today, you're probably an enthusiast and a leader. Now, given that, go back to your org strategic plan, review it, look at the value statements you have with an eye towards digital transformation opportunities and asking yourselves, how can technology and data promote this? Get senior leadership. If you are not a senior leader, you are still a leader, but get senior leadership to help champion the work. Develop a guiding coalition. Often the folks you know are going to be equally excited about using these tools with you to create a better, bolder institution or school that helps students learn better, transform their minds, and change their lives. And then gather and organize relevant information on programs and policy, data, technology, and last but not least, people. Because people are going to have to use these tools with great effect if we're going to see change. Create a plan of action and integration and socialize it across the college community. It's exciting work. It's meaningful work. It's work that has value that is priceless, both to our hearts and our minds, but also to those who we serve. It's an honor to be here with all of you. and a privilege now to take a moment if we have time, and I'll kick it back to Carlos just to take questions, whether they're in the chat feature or live. And so thank you all so much again. Really have appreciated this opportunity to talk with all of you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It was a great presentation. And you already seen the virtual applause and emojis. Please, the audience, feel free to share your love, share your applause to Jonathan. It's been a great presentation, and is leaving us with a lot to think about, a lot to process, but more importantly, a lot for us to think on how we could act, how we could take action, and then helping in promoting the next change. We're very happy. If you have a couple of questions, and I think, you know, as you were through the Mentimeter, which was held by, so some participants loved the idea and already thinking about how they could implement it to their teaching toolbox. Great. We're very happy with that. And I think I don't see any questions. We want to thank again, Jonathan, for your great presentation. And I'm going to see if I could quickly, who do I have here? My friends, colleagues from the steering committee to quickly join the stage to so that you know who are the people that are behind this whole effort. And then, you know, they are just the we are just the steering committee, but we have, you know, all of the members of the staff from the different campuses who are have been helping us throughout the day. We're very fortunate to have such a wonderful team that is helping us going through the you know, the concurrent sessions, helping with the technical support, and you know, we're very thankful. As you see, you know, in order for us to be able to promote, and Jonathan mentioned about, you know, we have to make sure we identify the people, and then it is important for us to be able to do that. I'm going to pass it quickly to my colleagues. If you want to give a couple of closing remarks.
I guess I'll go first, Carlos.
Good.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your keynote. It was outstanding. It was Carlos told us that it was going to be great, but it was way better than what we expected, and I'm sure the audience felt the same way. So thank you for that. And I want to thank all of the participants, all of the presenters, all of the support team from the 3 different campuses. It takes like I mentioned earlier, it takes a small army of people to pull off something like this. And I want to congratulate them, because without them and you guys, there would be no conference. So hopefully you will be here face to face next year at our 10th anniversary celebration. And I hope you provided some support, some feedback on your ideas about how we can make that celebration memorable. Thank you.
Kate, Mark, you want to give a... Don't be shy.
Frankly, I think Albert said it all. We're really looking forward to next year, and we want to make it a memorable experience.
Yeah, I agree. The keynote was amazing. We are really on the cusp of change, and it'll be just interesting to see what happens next.
Great. And with this, we want to thank everybody for being here. We look forward to seeing you next year, and please continue the conversation. This session is already in social media, so please continue the conversation. We're going to be sharing this as well with our campuses and colleagues. Continue this conversation and share the great work that is happening throughout CUNY. And enjoy the weekend. Thank you, everybody.